A single flame flickers against a wall of London fog, and for a heartbeat, it seems to float in the darkness with no visible source. Passers-by in the year 1813 wrote of these moments with quiet astonishment. They believed the night itself was being persuaded to retreat, inch by unseen hands. What few ever realized was that this gentle glow came from one of the most meticulously choreographed routines in pre-electric Britain, carried out by men whose names almost never appeared in the records they illuminated. They were the lamplighters, and for more than 2 centuries, they shaped the rhythm of British nights in ways that many today have forgotten. Their work began long before electricity, when the streets of London, Edinburgh, York, and Bristol were ruled by darkness so thick that city officials described it as a second silence. Yet the silence wasn't empty. Carriages rattled over cobblestones, tavern shutters creaked, messengers hurried with sealed letters, and watchmen traced their patrols with lanterns that cast trembling halos on the ground. Into this world stepped the lamplighter, a solitary figure who moved with deliberate precision just moments before dusk. Contemporary diaries record their presence as both comforting and strangely anonymous. A lamplighter could pass inches from a household doorway, lift the long iron pole to coax a flame into life, and vanish among the shadows before anyone had fully noticed him. Still, the effect he left behind was unmistakable. The street that felt for the first time that day inhabited rather than abandoned. Official accounts place organized street lighting in London as early as 1684, when oil lamps first began lining major roads under the supervision of city authorities. But the lamplighters themselves became indispensable by the 18th century, particularly after the 1716 Act, which required thousands of lamps to be maintained across the capital during the darker months. Their nightly routes were mapped with almost military discipline. Every lamp had to be lit at a specific time, checked for fuel, shielded from wind, and adjusted so the flame burned cleanly. A single interruption, a missing wick, a broken glass pane, or rain seeping through the casing, could plunge an entire stretch of road into the kind of darkness that magistrates blamed for thefts, lost travelers, and even carriage collisions. Yet behind this structured routine lay an atmosphere far more evocative than the officials ever wrote down. Picture the lamplighter on a November evening, boots damp from an earlier drizzle, coat brushed by drifting smoke from nearby chimneys, fingers numbed from carrying the metal ladder that clattered softly with each step. When he finally reached the lamp, the light he awakened was modest, nowhere near the brightness of modern bulbs, but it extended just far enough to carve silhouettes of iron railings and create faint pools of gold on the stone. What historians later uncovered in municipal records adds a layer of intrigue to these everyday scenes. Some lamplighters were former soldiers entrusted with keeping order in fragile neighborhoods. Others were older craftsmen whose failing eyesight in daylight strangely didn't prevent them from managing small flames at night. And in certain towns, lamplighters quietly doubled as informants for local authorities, noting disturbances during their rounds without ever appearing to stop or stare. Their presence was subtle, but their absence was instantly felt. The glow didn't lie. But the deeper researchers went into the archives, the more the lamplighters' world revealed layers that earlier historians had overlooked. A set of papers from 1789, preserved in the Guildhall Library, describes a dispute between lamplighters and parish officials. In the margins of the document, an irritated clerk notes that entire routes depended not only on punctuality, but on the lamplighters' judgment of weather, crowd behavior, and even the temper of the street. The phrase is striking. It suggests that lighting Britain's streets was not simply a mechanical task. It was a negotiation with the living city, its moods, and its dangers. Edinburgh Old Town offers some of the clearest glimpses into these hidden dynamics. Narrow closes, steep wynds, and smoke-laden air made the work treacherous. Lamplighters were expected to climb uneven stairways with ladders slung over their shoulders while avoiding refuse tossed from upper windows. One 1794 account describes a lamplighter slipping near Fleshmarket Close, saved only because a butcher grabbed his coat as he fell towards the drop. Such events were common enough that city records quietly increased pay in certain districts, acknowledging without fully stating that lighting these areas required an unusual blend of courage and familiarity with the terrain. Even more compelling are the testimonies written decades later by residents who grew up watching the lamplighters. Many recalled how children would try to follow them, entranced by the steady ritual of one flame after another. Yet none of the observers ever described a lamplighter rushing. Their movements were always deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though each lamp belonged to a chain of small promises that darkness would not win entirely. A London woman writing in 1832 referred to lamplighters as the keepers of the first hour of evening, a phrase that appears again in a different diary from Portsmouth in the same year. No evidence suggests the term was officially used, yet its recurrence hints at a shared perception. The lamplighter governed a boundary moment, when the day's final threads dissolved and night declared itself fully present. However, a discovery made by a group of researchers in the mid-20th century introduced a new and unexpected detail. In several towns, notably Bath, Canterbury, and parts of Lancashire, lamplighters maintained small notebooks. These were never intended for public eyes. They included notes about fuel shortages, broken chimneys, and maintenance requests, but also observations of disturbances they witnessed. A quarrel outside an inn, a patrol that arrived late, a traveler wandering in circles as though lost. These notebooks rarely exceeded a few pages, but their survival suggests that lamplighters were more aware of the social texture of the streets than official records ever admit. One entry from 1807, found in a private collection in Bath, reads simply, "Lamp 14 still out, wind strong, a figure waiting by the railings." Again, nothing else. No explanation. The phrasing is so minimal that it borders on eerie, and yet historians agree it was almost certainly a practical note rather than an attempt at storytelling. Still, such fragments offer a quiet window into how these men monitored their surroundings, even as they worked alone. Their lantern poles, long metal rods usually tipped with a hook and igniting device, became extensions of their own presence. Contemporary engravings show lamplighters lifting these poles with a smooth, practiced motion, igniting the wick through a small opening in the glass. For many lamps before the shift to gas, this meant adjusting the oil reservoir to ensure even burning. By the early 1800s, gas lighting began to transform the craft. The first public gas lamps in Pall Mall appeared in 1807, and from that moment the lamplighter's task changed dramatically. Instead of tending individual flames, he became a regulator of a new, unpredictable technology. Gas sometimes flared too brightly, rattling inside its casing and startling residents. At other times, it burned faintly, giving off a trembling blue glow. Lamplighters were trained to control these variations using small valves and keys, tools that gave their routes a more technical character. Yet, despite this evolution, the essence of their role persisted. They still walked the same streets, still kept watch over the quiet minutes before full nightfall, and still carried the responsibility of turning entire neighborhoods visible. What surprised researchers most was how resistant many communities were to the disappearance of the human lamplighter, even after automated systems emerged. Letters to local councils show residents requesting that lamplighters remain on duty for as long as possible, citing the reassurance their presence brought. It suggests that the lamplighter had become more than a technician. He was a subtle guardian of communal order, an unsung link between households and the public realm. And perhaps that is why, when the final generation of lamplighters retired in the early 20th century, several towns organized small ceremonies. They weren't grand events, more like quiet acknowledgments that a familiar silhouette would no longer walk the evening streets. Yet the deepest shift in how historians understood lamplighters came from a set of records that lay untouched for more than a century. In the basement of the London Metropolitan Archives, researchers cataloging municipal papers discovered a series of maintenance ledgers from the early 1800s. They seemed ordinary at first, neat columns of lamp numbers, fuel measurements, and repair costs. But scattered within them were unusual annotations written in a second hand, smaller and more deliberate. These notes did not concern repairs at all. Instead, they mentioned changes in neighborhood behavior as street lighting expanded. One entry from 1818 observes that a previously troubled alley near Bishopsgate experienced fewer confrontations once 3 additional lamps were installed. Another notes that markets closing after dusk began staying open a little longer, as though encouraged by the fragile glow. These comments suggest that lamplighters were not merely facilitating light, they were reshaping social patterns in ways that contemporary lawmakers never formally recorded. The discovery reshaped the traditional view of lamplighters as anonymous laborers. Historians realized that they had been early contributors to what would later be called urban design. They understood where people gathered, where shadows encouraged mischief, and which bends in the road needed a steadier flame. A journal from York in 1824 even describes lamplighters advising council members on the placement of new posts. Their input was practical rather than political, yet it subtly guided the evolving architecture of nighttime Britain. And because their insights were gained through observation rather than authority, they revealed aspects of the city that official reports tended to overlook. Another surprising dimension emerged in accounts from industrial towns in the north. As factories extended working hours, the need for consistent night lighting became urgent. Lamplighters often walked their routes long before workers spilled into the streets. And they were among the first to witness the social transformations brought on by industrialization. A record from Manchester in 1839 mentions a lamplighter encountering columns of mill workers leaving their shifts at impossible hours, their faces pale under the gaslight's glare. He noted in his log that the lamps burn longer than the men can rest, an observation historians now read as an early critique of industrial working conditions. These small, human remarks appear throughout the surviving texts, offering glimpses of an era when Britain's nights began mirroring its restless days. But the most remarkable revelation came from a forgotten set of instructions issued to lamplighters in Liverpool. The document, dated 1826 and found in the city's public record office, included an unexpected clause. Lamplighters were required to report any lamp whose flame had been interfered with. Interference meant someone had attempted to dim or extinguish it. This suggests that street lighting, far from being universally welcomed, sometimes clashed with those who preferred the anonymity of the dark. In neighborhoods where illicit trade flourished, brighter streets meant fewer places to disappear. Several notes in the 1826 register describe lamps being repeatedly tampered with in the same locations, prompting officials to assign additional rounds to the lamplighters. These episodes, though not widely discussed at the time, highlight a tension between illumination and secrecy, between the newly visible streets and those who depended on their obscurity. The earliest reports of sabotage were almost understated. A cracked glass pane here, a missing wick there. But by the 1830s, some towns resorted to protective metal cages around specific lamps. The presence of these cages is still visible in a few historic districts today, a quiet reminder that the battle for light was not only against the natural dark, but against human resistance as well. Lamplighters thus found themselves in a role few expected. They weren't just caretakers of light, they were unintentional custodians of public order. Their nightly circuits became a subtle assertion that the street belonged to the community, not to those who hoped to conceal themselves within its shadows. What makes these discoveries so striking is how little the lamplighters themselves wrote about their own significance. They rarely described fear, even when passing through districts known for unrest. They made no grand claims about safeguarding the public, though their presence undoubtedly did just that. Instead, they focused on the flame, its brightness, its steadiness, its endurance through wind and rain. In their silence, historians now perceive an unspoken ethic, that the reliability of light mattered because people relied on it, and that tending this light was an act of service stronger than any proclamation. As electricity began spreading through Britain in the late 19th century, the lamplighters' world narrowed. Cities tested automatic ignition systems. Councils debated efficiency and cost. Gas companies, eager to modernize, introduced mechanisms that no longer required a human hand at dusk. And yet, even in these transitional decades, many lamplighters continued working side by side with new technology. Some were reassigned to check gas pressures or clean glass chimneys, their roles transformed but not erased. Others resisted retirement quietly, walking their habitual routes long after their lamps no longer needed them. Letters from residents in Nottingham and Gloucester describe seeing elderly lamplighters strolling their old circuits with no pole, pausing beneath lamps as if confirming the light was truly there. These accounts are simple, yet they capture the emotional weight of witnessing a profession fade in real time. The final generation of lamplighters carried with them a memory of Britain few people alive today have ever experienced, a country where darkness arrived not with the flip of a switch, but with a slow, almost ceremonial descent. They remembered how the first lamp sparked each evening, how the glow gradually multiplied along the street, how alleys shifted from ominous to navigable, and how night transformed into something structured rather than chaotic. In interviews recorded in the 1930s, some lamplighters spoke modestly of their work, but their words hinted at a deeper understanding. One retired lamplighter from Kent said, "People think we lit the streets, but really, we connected them." The phrase is simple, but it resonates. The small flames didn't just illuminate. They tied communities together through shared visibility and shared dependence on the same fragile light. Archival discoveries from the mid-20th century reinforce this idea. A researcher studying urban safety in Victorian Britain uncovered municipal reports showing measurable reductions in certain crimes after the expansion of street lighting. These findings were never widely publicized at the time, but they confirm what lamplighters witnessed night after night. When the darkness retreated even slightly, the behavior of the streets changed. People walked later, markets lingered, taverns spilled warm light onto pavements, neighbors recognized one another more easily, even across distances once claimed by shadow. It was a quiet shift, not dramatic enough for headlines, yet powerful in how it reshaped the psychology of public spaces. In that light, the lamplighter's role becomes clearer, not a guardian in the heroic sense, but a stabilizing force built into the nightly rhythm of the city. In the end, what remains of the lamplighters is more than the tools they used or the routes they walked. Their story rests in the subtle ways they influenced the landscape of Britain's nights. They bridged the gap between pre-industrial darkness and the electrically lit world we take for granted. They observed shifts in society before newspapers recorded them. They witnessed the rise of industry, the swell of urban life, the reorganization of neighborhoods, and the quiet resistance of those who preferred the concealment of unlit streets. And though they rarely left personal testimonies, their presence is still felt in archival traces, in street lore, and in the few surviving lamps that continue to burn in historic districts. As we look back from our modern vantage point, where light appears instantly and without ritual, the work of the lamplighters takes on a different meaning. It reminds us that illumination was once a craft, a responsibility carried each evening by human hands. It was slow, deliberate, and shaped not only by machinery, but by judgment, patience, and an intimate knowledge of the streets. Their story lingers in the faint imagination of what Britain looked like when the night was not a uniform darkness, but a network of small, trembling flames. If this glimpse into their world has brought something new to light for you, consider staying with this channel. Each story we explore adds another thread to the tapestry of Britain's hidden past. And if something in this account stirred your curiosity, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. It helps the conversation continue, and it connects all of us, much like those early lamps once did. quietly linking one street to the next.